Why did no one look her in the eye that morning? Captain Kayla Bennett felt it before she understood it. A silence at the briefing table, a quiet dismissal of her presence like she was an afterthought, a shadow clinging to the edges of a room filled with sharper stars. They weren't cruel, not exactly, but their avoidance was sharper than mockery. It told her everything. Her ideas weren't wanted here. Not now, not ever. She had been awake before the alarms. She always was. Sleep came lightly, broken by half-dreams of simulations, radar pings, and the hum of engines she knew better than her own heartbeat. She was restless, not from nerves, but from knowing. Knowing something no one else seemed to accept, that the doctrine was flawed. That stealth as they used it was brittle, predictable, already compromised. She had said it 100 times, and 100 times she had been told no. When the emergency klaxons shattered the pre-dawn stillness at 03:47, the corridors at Edwards Air Force Base exploded with motion. Pilots spilled from bunks, half-dressed, half-awake, pulling on flight suits with trembling hands. Kayla didn't tremble. She moved like water, fluid, practiced, precise. Her body knew what to do. Her mind burned with one thought. This was the moment they had feared, the one she had begged them to prepare for. Hangar 7 glowed harsh under floodlights. 200 of the Air Force's finest crowded together, faces pale and sharp under the weight of whatever message was about to be delivered. Engineers, test pilots, tacticians, the best minds in aviation. And Kayla, standing near the back, clutching her helmet like it was the only anchor in a storm that hadn't yet broken. Colonel Bradford's voice carried through the cavernous space like gravel on steel. Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing a technological threat that exceeds our current countermeasures. The screen behind him flickered alive with satellite images, enemy formations, strange patterns in the air, red symbols slashing across maps that had once felt invincible. In the last 72 hours, we've lost 11 Raptors, Bradford continued, his tone grave. Our stealth doctrine has been compromised. Enemy detection methods are finding us, tracking us, killing us. A hush, a wait. Eyes darted across the room, not at her, never at her. Kayla's pulse tightened in her throat. They still don't see it. Not yet. Major Whitman, the senior coordinator, leaned forward, brows knotted. Sir, how? What systems can penetrate F-22 signatures? Quantum, AI-supported radar. The answer was uncertain. Words like pattern recognition, machine learning, quantum radar floated in the stale air, each sounding like theory until they were paired with the truth. Dead pilots, empty seats, silence where voices had once been. Kayla's jaw locked. She couldn't hold it anymore. Sir, she said, cutting through the room. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Request permission to review enemy detection patterns. Bradford turned, his look carved from stone. He didn't need to say it, she knew the thought behind his eyes. Not you, not your theories. Captain Bennett, he said, you're assigned to experimental research, not tactical analysis. Leave this to. Sir, she pressed, heat in her voice now, my research is specifically about countering advanced detection methods, the exact ones appearing on that screen. A ripple of attention moved through the hangar. Some pilots smirked, there she goes again. Others looked wary, because part of them, just part, wondered if maybe the woman who trained alone, wrote reports no one read, and tested ideas no one wanted. Maybe she had seen something the rest of them had missed. Captain, your techniques have been reviewed and dismissed. Bradford's tone was final. They are not operationally relevant. But Kayla wasn't listening anymore. The data on the screen was all she needed. Her stomach sank. Enemy systems weren't measuring what the Raptors were, but how they behaved. Static stealth, the proud American doctrine, wasn't stealth at all anymore. It was a fingerprint, predictable, exploitable. She exhaled, slow, controlled. They're going to send us up there to die, unless. The room erupted with discussion. Engineers argued about impossibility. Tacticians debated retreat scenarios. The colonel repeated the same words, critical, dire, overwhelming. But Kayla was somewhere else already. Back in the hangar bay, back at her bird. Tail number 5487, the one she had modified in secret patch by patch, hour by hour, against orders, against doctrine. She had broken rules because the rules were broken. Her plane was no longer a Raptor in the conventional sense. It was something else. Something alive, shifting, able to mask and blur and fade in ways the manuals didn't even admit existed. She remembered the first time she'd tested it. Alone at night, instruments trembling with data no one else would believe. The fear had been real, burnout, crash, catastrophic failure. But the thrill had been stronger. For once, she wasn't invisible. She was invincible, at least in that moment. Enemy forces approaching in overwhelming numbers, Bradford was saying now. His voice rose over the din. 40-plus hostile jets inbound. This is not a drill. All available pilots prepare for immediate deployment. The hangar shook with sudden energy. Pilots scattered, adrenaline firing through veins, faces set like stone. Kayla didn't move at first. She just breathed, deep, controlled. 40 of them. And they'll kill us, everyone, unless I do this. Her boots rang hard against the concrete as she turned and headed for the line. Her bird waited, sleek and dark under floodlights, hiding its secrets in the skin she had carefully altered. Bennett, Major Whitman, intercepted her on the tarmac. His face was flushed with urgency. Your reserve, your modifications aren't authorized. Sir, with respect, she fired back, the unmodified aircraft are achieving zero effectiveness. Zero. We're throwing bodies into the grinder. You're risking catastrophic failure. And you're risking certain death, she shot back, her eyes steady. The calculation has changed. For a moment, just a heartbeat, his face shifted. Fear, not for her, but for all of them. He looked at the tactical board again, 40 enemy aircraft and counting. He looked back at her. Bennett, he said finally, voice low, if you're wrong, you'll die out there. She held his gaze. If I'm right, we all live. The silence between them lasted only a breath. Then he nodded once, sharp, and stepped back. You're cleared. Unlimited tactical authorization. Prove it. The words burned into her chest like fire. Unlimited. At last, not shackled. Free to fight the way she knew she had to. Free to show them, or free to burn in silence. 25 minutes later, Kayla was in the air. The Raptor purred beneath her, alive with the modifications she had nurtured like a secret child. Her HUD flickered strange readings, unsteady, unstable, but exactly as designed. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was shifting, modulating, bending herself into the seams of the electromagnetic spectrum. Ghost lead, Edwards' control called. Enemy aircraft inbound, 40+, advanced detection systems. They've eliminated every conventional unit. Kayla's lips parted. A calmness washed over her like a second skin. Control, Ghost lead, beginning experimental protocols. She toggled systems. The aircraft blurred. Her radar return disappeared, not reduced, not softened, but gone. Her Raptor melted into background noise, a quantum phantom. The sky outside was pale, fragile, just before dawn. She was alone, truly alone, flying into the teeth of an enemy no one had faced and lived to describe. Her heart beat steady. Her breath matched the rhythm of the engine. And beneath it all, one thought echoed. They laughed. They ignored me. But what they never understood is that invisibility was never about the plane. It was about me. How do you fight an enemy who doesn't even believe you exist? Kayla's hands tightened on the stick as her Raptor whispered through the dark sky, every surface alive with constant modulation. She had trained herself to feel what no manual had taught, to sense how the machine blended with the air, how her profile bent and warped against the enemy's search beams. She wasn't flying a jet anymore. She was threading a needle of impossibility. Her radio crackled with clipped, nervous voices from Edwards. Ghost lead, confirm visual of incoming hostiles, 40+, coordinates uploading. Kayla glanced at the tactical display. Red markers filled the screen, moving like a living organism. A swarm, a tide that was coming to sweep them clean from the sky. But she wasn't where they thought she was. Not on their radar, not on their scans. To them, she was nothing more than a shimmer, a misreading, a ghost. She remembered the laughter, the meetings where senior officers had smiled politely, waiting for her to stop. Dynamic stealth modulation isn't safe. It's impractical. It violates protocols. They dismissed her with words that cut deeper than insults. They had dismissed her as if she were irrelevant. Now those words were behind her. The horizon ahead glowed faintly, a bruise of dawn, and in that bruise waited the enemy. "Control," she said softly, beginning approach. Her breathing slowed. Each inhale was deliberate, each exhale controlled. She didn't allow herself to feel fear. It was too easy, too human. Instead, she felt focus, the knife edge of purpose. Fear could wait. The first enemy blip separated from the formation. A command aircraft. Bigger, brighter, pulsing with signals that told the others how to see, how to move. She knew instinctively that was the head of the serpent. Cut it and the body would flail. Kayla angled in. Her jet became something between matter and shadow. The quantum radar beams swept directly through her path. By every law she had been taught, she should have been exposed. Instead, her instruments showed nothing. The modulation shimmered around her like an invisible shield, not blocking detection, but confusing it, feeding their system's contradictions until they choked on the noise. Her thumb hovered over the weapon's trigger. For a moment, hesitation pressed in. Not about the kill, she had long accepted what her role demanded. The hesitation came from something deeper. If I fire, they'll know. Not who, not what, but they'll know something impossible exists out here. Am I ready to show them? A breath, a heartbeat, she fired. The missile streaked through dawn's thin light, invisible until the instant it found its mark. A flash, a collapse of metal and fire. The enemy command ship dissolved in the sky like it had been swallowed whole. "Control," she whispered, "primary target eliminated." For a second, silence. Then chaos. The enemy formation rippled with panic. Voices burst across intercepted comms, garbled with fear. No radar return. No track. Nothing to explain the explosion. To them, it must have seemed as though the heavens themselves had reached down and struck. Kayla's lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't even relieved. This was only the beginning. "Ghost lead," Edwards called, struggling to keep their voice calm. How did you get through their coverage?" Her reply was steady, clipped. "Signature modulation, electromagnetic uncertainty. They can't classify me." She didn't add the rest, the secret she had kept, even from them. That she had risked her own life with every adjustment. That a wrong input could fry her systems, or worse, turn her into a glowing beacon in the enemy's sky. "They think I'm untouchable. They don't know I'm balancing on the edge of disaster." The second target loomed ahead. She slid beneath their radar sweep, her jet disguised as atmospheric interference. The enemy pilot never saw her, never even flinched before the missile found him. Her HUD lit with another kill, another life gone, another weight pressing against her chest. Kayla's training had never been just about flight. It had been about silence, enduring silence at mess halls, in briefings, in the looks of her peers. She had learned to survive being unseen, but now her silence became a weapon. Every time an enemy jet disappeared without warning, fear spread faster than fire. She caught a fragment of comms, the enemy pilot's voice tight, breaking, equipment failure. "No, impossible, they're just vanishing." She closed her eyes for a second, just a second. She could almost hear his heartbeat, the disbelief in his voice. He wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid of not understanding why. Her third strike was quicker. A blur, a streak, and another flash. The Raptor seemed to appear and vanish like a specter, never there long enough to be believed. She was teaching them dread, an enemy worse than visible firepower, the dread of not knowing. "Ghost lead," Edwards said again. "We show 3-4 confirmed. Enemy formation breaking apart. They're panicking." Kayla allowed herself one long breath. The calm voice, the controlled tone, it was all a mask. Inside, the storm raged. Each kill wasn't triumph. It was a reminder: they will never forgive me if I fail. They will never forgive me if I succeed. She thought of the colonel's face, carved with doubt, of the engineers who had told her she was reckless, of every pilot who had looked past her in the briefing room. If I survive this, I'll go back to the same silence, the same dismissal, because that's who I am to them. Invisible, necessary only when the world is on fire. Her radar chirped. Another lock, another chance. She moved almost instinctively, weaving through beams of detection that should have cut her open. To the enemy, her jet registered as static, a glitch, background noise, nothing alive. She fired again. The explosion tore the sky. She imagined the other pilots' faces, wide-eyed, convinced the air itself had turned against them. The fifth came harder. Two fighters together, moving as one, hunting for the invisible attacker. They fired blindly, their missiles slicing empty air. She slid between them, close enough to see the shimmer of sunlight on their wings, close enough to feel the air currents shift. For an instant, she almost pitied them. Then she fired. Both jets disintegrated before they could even cry out. "Ghost lead," Control called, voice trembling. "7 confirmed, 7. Enemy is breaking apart." Kayla said nothing. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm. But inside, her chest ached. Not from fear, not from pride, but from the weight of silence. She was invisible not only to them, but to her own people. The kills would be tallied, the mission debriefed, the story told. And somewhere in the retelling, her part would blur, vanish, fade. Because that was who she was, the ghost. The enemy scattered, but she pursued. She had no choice. If even one of them escaped, her techniques could be studied, dissected, countered. She wasn't just fighting for survival, she was fighting to protect the secret itself. Her Raptor strained, systems redlining as she pushed it past safe margins. Warnings flashed across her HUD. She ignored them. One missile, two, another explosion, another piece of her soul chipped away. By the time the sky cleared, her body was trembling, not from exhaustion, but from the terrible quiet that followed destruction. 40 hostiles had entered American airspace. Already, a quarter of them lay scattered in smoke and fire, and she was still unseen. Kayla leaned back in her seat, eyes fixed on the horizon. She knew what the others didn't, what she hadn't told them, that this wasn't victory yet, that every second she stayed invisible was 1 second closer to catastrophic failure. Her systems weren't designed to last this way. And if they failed, she wouldn't just be visible. She would be exposed, alone, hunted by the survivors of a swarm that still outnumbered her 30 to 1. Her voice was steady when she pressed the comm. "Control, Ghost lead, continuing engagement." But inside, one question repeated like a drumbeat. What happens when the ghost becomes visible? What if her greatest weapon was also the very thing that could kill her? Kayla felt it first in her fingertips, the faint vibration that didn't belong. The Raptor's systems were whispering warnings, subtle shudders that no one else would have noticed. She did. She knew this jet like a second skin, and something beneath the surface was telling her, "You are pushing me past the edge." But there was no time to stop. The sky was still alive with red blips, enemy fighters weaving desperate patterns as they hunted an attacker they couldn't see. She banked hard, her jet sliding through their detection grid like a shadow slipping through cracks in the light. The comms burned with fragments of panic from the other side. "Something's out there." "I saw nothing, I swear, nothing." "Ghost, ghost, it's a ghost." Her own call sign, Ghost lead, echoed back to her in their voices, though they had never heard it. The irony cut deep. To her own command, she had been invisible for years. Now even her enemies gave her a name. "Control," she said evenly. 11 confirmed eliminations. Commencing pursuit of breakaways." Her voice betrayed nothing. But inside, her pulse was racing, not with fear of them, but with fear of herself. She knew how thin the margin was. Every adjustment to her modulation suite was a gamble. Too much interference and her systems could collapse. Too little and she'd flash onto enemy radar like a flare. She thought of something her father once told her, long before she wore a uniform. Sometimes, the difference between genius and madness is only whether you survive the night. The 12th kill came fast. She slid behind a fleeing fighter, her Raptor's profile shimmering as nothing more than distorted static on their sensors. The missile left her wing like a whisper, another bloom of fire, another life snuffed. For a second her stomach turned. The faces she never saw haunted her, the young men who had woken in another country hours ago, laughing with their squadron, never expecting to meet an end they couldn't even name. She wasn't their executioner. She was their nightmare, one they would never wake from. She shook her head sharply. There was no room for that now. She had learned long ago that compassion in the wrong moment could kill faster than a bullet. Still, a shadow of it lingered. "Ghost lead," Edward's control came back, their voice tight with awe. "You're rewriting everything we thought possible." She ignored the praise. Praise was dangerous. Praise softened the blade, and right now she needed to stay sharp. The next wave came harder. 3 enemy fighters locked into tight formation, flying shoulder to shoulder. Kayla dove beneath them, her jet trembling with the strain of constant modulation. She slid between their beams, every instrument screaming at her to stop. Her HUD flickered, systems strained. The engine coughed just once. For a heartbeat she felt the cold sting of exposure, her Raptor blinking visible on one of their screens. "Not now, not now." She yanked the controls, forcing the modulation suite to overcompensate. Her jet disappeared again, dissolving into noise. But the damage was done. One enemy pilot caught the flicker just for an instant. His voice cracked over comms. "There. I saw it. Something. There." Kayla didn't let him finish. 2 missiles screamed upward, slicing the formation apart before they could coordinate. One exploded instantly. The second caught fire and spun downward, tearing through the clouds. The third tried to climb, desperate, but she was already behind him. The kill was clean, clinical. "Ghost lead 15 confirmed," she reported. But her hands were damp on the stick now. She didn't show it, didn't say it, but she knew the ghost had flickered. The myth could be broken. And if they believed she could be seen, even for a moment, the fear that kept them off balance might turn into resolve. That would be far more dangerous than any radar. She forced her breathing back under control. "Steady. You can't break now. They don't need to see your fear. They only need to feel theirs." Her radar painted another cluster, 5 ships circling like vultures, each firing blind, missiles crisscrossing the air where they imagined she might be. One streaked close enough that her cockpit lit with the flare. She flinched instinctively, body bracing for the impact that never came. The warhead vanished into empty sky. She rolled inverted, sliding down behind them. For a second she thought of her squadron back on base, the pilots grounded, watching the feeds, seeing only the explosions, not the woman behind them. Would they believe this when it was over? Or would they chalk it up to chance, anomaly, luck? Her missile bay opened. She didn't hesitate. 3 kills in under 10 seconds. The last 2 tried to scatter, but her stealth was too deep, her angles too sharp. She cut them down with a precision that felt almost cruel. 20, half their number gone. Kayla exhaled through her nose, a controlled release of air. Her body ached. Her systems hissed with warning tones. She glanced at the readouts, temperatures spiking, electronic warfare suite nearing failure thresholds. "If this collapses, I die." But there was no turning back. She couldn't let a single survivor carry word of what she had done. If they learned the shape of her techniques, they would adapt. The next war would come harder, faster, sharper. No, the secret had to stay here, buried in the wreckage. She pitched her jet hard into a vertical climb, spearing upward into the pale dawn. The horizon spun beneath her. Below, she saw the debris fields, streaks of smoke, flames tumbling like dying stars. She felt no triumph, only gravity pulling at her heart. The next enemy wave surged upward to meet her. 10 fighters, their formation ragged but still dangerous. They fired in unison, a storm of missiles slicing toward her. Her hands were steady, her eyes sharp. She twisted her jet sideways, her profile bending into interference. The missiles lost her instantly, veering into nothing, detonating harmlessly in the air. The enemy pilots screamed across the comms in disbelief. How? Kayla didn't answer. She slipped behind them like a phantom, her Raptor materializing for a split second in their blind spots before disappearing again. She struck once, twice, 3 times. The sky burned. Her systems groaned. Another warning flared red across her screen. She ignored it. Later. Control, she said through gritted teeth. 24 confirmed. Engaging remaining hostiles. Her own voice sounded strange to her, calm, detached, like someone else was speaking. Maybe that was how she survived this. Maybe she had to become someone else, someone colder, someone who didn't carry the weight of what she was doing. But deep inside, Kayla knew the truth. Every explosion etched itself into her, invisible scars piling atop the old ones. They would never see it, the men in the briefing rooms, the commanders behind polished desks. But she would feel it, long after the smoke cleared. She angled back into the fight. 30 enemies still remained. The ghost could not falter now. And somewhere in the back of her mind, one quiet, relentless question pulsed. How much longer before the ghost becomes human again? What happens when the mask you wear begins to crack? Kayla's cockpit glowed in red warnings, each alarm a whisper of betrayal. The Raptor was holding for now, but every maneuver, every modulation she demanded, was tearing at its heart. She could almost feel the aircraft begging for relief, its systems strained beyond the lines men had drawn in manuals. Yet below her the enemy still swarmed. 30 fighters remained, searching, firing, desperate to force shape into the ghost that haunted them. Ghost lead, Edward's control called, voice taut. Telemetry shows anomalies in your systems. Can you confirm? Her hand hovered above the panel, silencing the warnings. She didn't want them to hear it in her voice. She didn't want them to know the truth. Control, negative, systems nominal. It was a lie, and it was the first one she had spoken all night. The next enemy formation closed in, a staggered wall of jets sweeping radar beams wide, overlapping, tightening like a net. Their doctrine was adapting. They couldn't see her, but they could feel her in the empty spaces, the absences their machines couldn't explain. Kayla shifted modulation patterns again. Her jet stuttered, an electric cough. For half a second, her profile lit up on their scopes. She felt it like an electric shock down her spine. And in that heartbeat, they saw her. Their target. Missiles surged upward. The cockpit flared in warning tones. Her chest clenched. Kayla rolled hard, diving through the storm, her body slammed against the harness. The modulation suite screamed, protesting, slipping in and out of sync. Radar returns flickered, appearing and vanishing like a ghost caught in lightning. For the first time that night, she wasn't sure if she would survive. Her hand trembled, not fear, strain. Her body pushed to its limits, her jet dragged beyond reason. Sweat stung her eyes. She breathed once, twice, forcing calm. "Not yet," she whispered to the machine. "Stay with me, please." The missiles passed harmlessly into nothing. The net failed. She had vanished again. But in that moment, she had been seen. And the fear that had paralyzed her enemies began to twist into something sharper. If they could glimpse her once, they could believe she was real. And what was real could be hunted. Kayla's eyes narrowed. If I falter again, they'll find the courage to push harder. I can't let them believe. She dove back into the fight. 2 quick kills, clean and efficient. Explosions cut across the dawn, but the victories brought no satisfaction. Each strike felt heavier, dragging her down, not lifting her up. Her headset crackled, enemy comms bleeding through. Their voices weren't panicked now. They were sharp, focused. She bleeds, she is not untouchable. Press the attack. Kayla's throat tightened. It wasn't just her systems breaking, it was the myth. And myths, once broken, never returned whole. She forced her jet into maneuvers no pilot should survive, twisting between overlapping radar cones, slicing through blind spots too narrow to exist. Sweat soaked her back, every muscle clenched in brutal focus. Her HUD marked 2 more kills, then another, 25-26. Ghost lead, Control called again, their calm fraying. We're reading stress fractures in your engine output. You need to disengage. Disengage, the word cut like glass. To leave now was to undo everything, to let the survivors escape, to betray the secret she had risked everything to protect. Negative, she said, voice firm. Continuing engagement. A pause on the other end, then silence. They didn't argue again. Her body ached, her lungs burned, every nerve screamed. She thought of the hangar, of faces that hadn't believed her, of voices that had spoken over her. And here she was, holding the line alone, unseen, unheard. If I die here, will they even understand what I did for them? Or will it all vanish like I was never here at all? The next enemy squadron approached in staggered pairs, disciplined, controlled, not panicked anymore, not flailing. Hunters now, not prey. Kayla braced herself. Her jet rattled with every modulation shift, systems straining. She knew she was burning the candle from both ends. The aircraft was alive, yes, but it was dying with her. Her first strike broke their rhythm. One jet gone in a flash, but the others tightened formation, sweeping radar beams wide. Another flicker, another glimpse of her. Missiles surged toward the Phantom. She pushed harder. Her jet screamed in protest, but it obeyed, for now. She slipped the lock, diving beneath them, reappearing on their 6, 2 more kills. But the cost was steep. Her instruments were a riot of red warnings now. The engine temp needle pinned against the line, hydraulics bleeding pressure. She whispered again as if to a friend, "Not yet, stay with me just a little longer." And somehow it did. She climbed again, striking from above. 28, 29, 30. The numbers blurred together. Her body felt hollow, like each missile that left her wing pulled a piece of her soul with it. The comms burned with enemy voices, furious now, desperate. "She's not a ghost. She's human. Find her, kill her." Kayla almost laughed, bitter and sharp. Human. Yes, she was human. Fragile, breakable, drowning in the silence of a war no one else could fight. The 31st kill came as her vision blurred, black edges creeping in. She shook her head, forcing blood back to her brain. "Not now, not yet." "Ghost lead," Control said softly, almost reverent now. "You've turned the impossible into doctrine." She didn't answer. Words felt useless. Out here, the only language was fire and silence. Another lock warning blared. Her jet stuttered again, slipping into visibility for a split second. She rolled, twisted, fired blind. A detonation lit the horizon. 32. But now they knew. The ghost wasn't flawless. The ghost could bleed. Kayla gritted her teeth, breath ragged. "Let them believe I bleed, but they will never see me break." Her hands tightened on the stick, her eyes sharp despite the blur. The fight wasn't finished. Not yet. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion, beneath the strain, one thought whispered like a promise. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The ghost would act until there was nothing left. What do you do when the very thing keeping you alive begins to die beneath you? The first sign was small, a hiccup in the modulation stream, a faint crackle in her HUD. It lasted less than a breath, but Kayla felt it deep in her chest. The ghost was unraveling. She gripped the stick tighter, forcing her breathing steady, even as the alarms multiplied. The Raptor's skin still shimmered against detection beams, but the rhythm was off. The modulation pattern was slipping out of tune, like an orchestra gone ragged. To the enemy, it might look like nothing yet, just a glitch, a static spark. But Kayla knew better. "Control," she said, her voice taut. systems under strain, adjusting protocols. What she didn't say, I'm running out of time. Below, 20 enemy fighters still circled, their formation fractured but stubborn. They were tired, angry, desperate, but so was she. For every life she'd cut from the sky, another part of her jet, another part of herself had been stripped away. She closed her eyes for half a second, feeling the cockpit around her. The heat from the panels, the vibration of the engines, the pulse of something alive but breaking. She whispered, so quietly no one could hear, "Just a little longer, please." The next attack came fast. Two fighters dove from opposite angles, their radar beams sweeping wide. Kayla's modulation suite stuttered again. Her jet flickered. This time they saw it. Lock acquired. The missile warning tone shrieked in her ears. She jerked the Raptor into a climb, the G-force crushing her chest, her vision narrowing to a tunnel. One missile streaked past, detonating harmlessly in empty air. The second clung tighter, its seeker hungry. Kayla forced her jet sideways, bleeding altitude. The modulation system coughed, failed, then roared back online in a cascade of static. For 3 eternal seconds she was visible, a shape, a target. Enemy voices screamed across comms. There, she's real, she's there. She fired, chaff rolled, prayed. The missile veered, confused by the sudden storm of false echoes. It exploded far behind her. Her hands shook, not from fear, adrenaline, exhaustion, the cost of carrying the fight alone. Her chest burned. Her throat was raw. She hadn't realized how hard she was clenching her teeth until her jaw ached. Ghost lead, Control's voice came through, brittle with strain. We lost you for a moment. Are you? I'm still here, she cut them off. Her voice was even though her insides roared, engaging. The ghost had cracked, but she wasn't finished. She dove back into the fight, using what remained of her stealth like a broken blade. It wasn't perfect anymore. She couldn't vanish completely, but she could bend, distort, confuse. It was enough. She stalked another fighter, sliding in close before they realized she was there. A quick missile, a flash of fire, 33, then another, 34. Her HUD bled warnings now. Overheating, structural fatigue, electronic warfare, suite nearing catastrophic failure. She silenced them one by one, refusing to let the noise break her focus. Her mind drifted just for a moment to the hangar, to the faces of her peers. Would they believe this when she returned? Would they understand what it had cost? Or would they reduce her night to a statistic, a number on a chart, stripped of the silence, the sweat, the invisible weight of each decision? She knew the answer. She had lived it her entire career, and still she fought. The next engagement was chaos. 4 fighters in a tight box, sweeping, firing blind. Kayla cut between them, her jet rattling as she forced it past its breaking point. One missile streaked wide, missing her by feet. Another clipped past so close her cockpit flashed with the fire of its detonation. She fired back, 2 kills, then a third. The fourth turned directly into her, a suicidal dive, guns blazing. For an instant she saw the pilot's canopy flash in the dawn. She saw his face. Young, determined, afraid. She fired. The explosion consumed him before she could think too long. 37. Her breath shuddered in her chest. She hated that she had seen his face. It was easier when they were shadows on a radar, but faces stayed. Faces haunted. Her system screamed again. This time, the modulation collapsed fully for a moment. Her Raptor lit up on enemy radar like a torch. Every hostile sensor locked on. Target confirmed. Engage, engage. The sky erupted. Missiles converged, a storm of white trails tearing toward her. Kayla's pulse spiked. She shoved her jet into a dive, pulling harder than her body could bear. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. Her lungs screamed for air. Not yet, she hissed, not yet. Her jet plunged, tearing through clouds, twisting, rolling, every warning blaring at once. The missiles followed, hungry, closing fast. And then silence. The modulation suite coughed, rebooted, caught. Her jet disappeared again, dissolving into static just as the missiles lost their lock. They detonated harmlessly in the empty sky. Kayla gasped, her vision clearing in jagged bursts. She was alive, barely. But she knew, one more failure like that and she wouldn't be. "Control," she rasped. 37 confirmed, continuing. Her voice was steady again, but inside she was hollow. Each word cost her more than the last. She turned back toward the survivors. Only 3 remained now. 3 fighters against 1 ghost. But she wasn't a ghost anymore, not truly. The mask was cracking, the myth bleeding away. Still, she pressed forward, because she had no choice. She angled behind the first survivor. A clean missile shot, unflinching. 38. The second tried to flee, diving hard for escape. She chased, pushing her jet into the red, engine straining, frame rattling. She caught him before he broke free, her missile cutting him from the sky. 39. The last fighter ran wide, screaming into comms. His words were panicked, desperate, pleading. "She's not human, she's..." Kayla silenced him with fire. 40. And then silence. The sky was empty. The swarm was gone. The impossible had been done. But the victory felt cold, heavy. Her jet groaned beneath her, every system battered. Her body trembled, drained of strength. Her heart was heavy with the faces she hadn't seen, the silence she had carried. "Control," she said at last, her voice a whisper. "All hostiles eliminated, airspace clear." There was no cheer on the other end, no celebration, only stunned silence. Because they knew, what she had done shouldn't have been possible. Kayla leaned back in her seat, staring into the pale horizon. The ghost had won, but the woman inside the ghost, she wondered if she had anything left. What do they see when the ghost finally comes home? Edwards Air Force Base shimmered in the morning light, its runways still, its hangars hushed. To the men and women watching the sky, it must have felt unreal, waiting for something they couldn't track, couldn't measure. Kayla's Raptor descended through the clouds, silent, spectral. Even her own command couldn't see her on their radar screens. Only her voice on the radio kept them grounded. "Control, Ghost lead, 10 miles southeast, 12,000 feet. Request approach clearance." "Ghost lead," came the reply, hesitant, uncertain. "We don't have visual, confirm position." Kayla glanced down. She was there, plain as day, slicing across the sky. But to them she was still invisible. She let out a breath, heavy, tired. "Recommend visual approach. You won't pick me up otherwise." A pause, then, "Copy, Ghost lead, proceed." She guided her jet toward the runway. At a mile out, ground crews finally caught sight of her, eyes widening as the aircraft seemed to materialize from empty air. Gasps rippled through the line. Mechanics, engineers, officers, they all watched a phantom solidify into steel. Her landing was smooth, almost too smooth given the storm she had just survived. The jet's tires kissed the tarmac, smoke curling, metal groaning. She taxied forward, canopy hissing as it opened. When Kayla climbed out, her body betrayed her. Her legs trembled. Her face was pale. She clutched the rim of the cockpit for balance. But she stood tall, helmet under her arm, expression carved into stone. A crowd approached, Colonel Bradford, Dr. Alexandra Stone, analysts with clipboards, officers with questions already forming on their lips. Their faces were a strange mix of awe, fear, and hunger. Hunger for answers, for data, for the secret that had just rewritten everything they thought they knew about air combat. Bradford spoke first. His voice was measured, almost reverent. "Captain Bennett, you eliminated 40 enemy aircraft. 40, all equipped with systems designed to counter the F-22. You achieved what should have been impossible." Kayla said nothing. She only met his eyes, waiting. Dr. Stone stepped forward, holding a tablet filled with jagged readouts. "Our instruments show you maintained tactical invisibility for nearly 2 hours. No radar return. No electromagnetic profile consistent with conventional stealth. "Captain, how did you do this?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Everyone leaned in, desperate to hear the secret. Kayla swallowed once, her throat dry. She chose her words carefully. Dynamic signature management, modulating every profile, creating uncertainty their systems couldn't classify. Bradford frowned. "You're saying the F-22 has capabilities beyond design specifications?" "Not beyond," Kayla replied, her tone flat. "Already present, just unused." Dr. Stone shook her head. "Captain, the systems you describe were never meant to operate in that way. Integration at that level risks catastrophic failure. You could have lost the aircraft. You could have died." Kayla's eyes softened just slightly, and yet here we are. The silence that followed was heavier than applause, because none of them wanted to admit it. They had dismissed her. They had laughed, ignored, written her off as a reckless dreamer. And now, their survival rested on the very thing they had thrown away. But Kayla didn't feel vindicated. Not truly. Instead, she felt hollow. Because she knew the truth, they saw the results, yes, but they didn't see her. They didn't see the fear, the exhaustion, the weight of carrying 40 lives on her shoulders. They didn't see the woman who had begged them to listen. They only saw the data. The debrief began within the hour. She sat in a cavernous room filled with screens and analysts, her helmet resting on the table in front of her. A dozen experts pored over telemetry, replaying fragments of her flight. "Captain," one engineer asked, "your modulation created localized anomalies, electromagnetic distortions that confused their quantum radar. Was this intentional?" "Yes," explained the algorithm. "I can't." They blinked at her. "Why not?" "Because it wasn't an algorithm," Kayla said quietly. "It was instinct." That silenced the room. She leaned forward, her voice low but steady. "Every adjustment, every modulation, I felt it. I listened to the aircraft. I moved with it. There is no manual for what I did, no checklist. It was human intuition woven into machine potential. That's why you can't replicate it with numbers." The analysts exchanged uneasy glances. They wanted formulas, protocols, something they could package and pass on. But what she had given them was not science. It was art. And art could not be standardized. Bradford's jaw tightened. "Captain, you understand what this means. If your methods can't be codified, they can't be taught, which means we're still vulnerable." Kayla's gaze didn't waver. "Or maybe it means you need to stop teaching doctrine that kills your pilots. Maybe it means you need to trust the people willing to see beyond it." Her words landed heavy. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others looked away. Because she wasn't just talking about stealth anymore. She was talking about the walls they had built around themselves. The walls of procedure. The walls of arrogance. The walls that had left her invisible until the day she saved them. The debrief stretched on for 12 hours. Questions, answers, analysis, disbelief. Kayla sat through it all, silent when she could be, blunt when she had to be. With every hour, her exhaustion deepened, but she refused to show it. When at last they released her, the sun was setting outside. The base was quiet, the desert painted in orange and gold. She walked alone down the tarmac, helmet in hand, her shadow stretching long across the concrete. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt the ache of silence pressing in again. Tomorrow, the analysts would debate her data. The officers would argue doctrine. The engineers would question the limits of physics. And she would still be invisible. Not because she had failed, but because she had succeeded in a way they couldn't comprehend. She paused, staring at her Raptor resting in the hangar. The jet looked ordinary now, stripped of the phantom it had been hours ago. Mechanics swarmed around it, measuring, testing, prodding, trying to dissect the ghost. Kayla smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. They would never find it, not the way they wanted. Because the ghost was never in the machine. It had always been in her. What happens when your victory becomes the very thing they fear the most? 6 months after that night, Kayla sat in a room that didn't look like victory at all. No medals hung on the walls, no banners, just steel, screens, and silence. A classified chamber buried deep beneath the Pentagon. Across the table sat generals, engineers, analysts, the faces of authority, and all of them were staring at her like she was both savior and threat. On the wall, replay footage flickered. The impossible engagement. 40 enemy fighters erased by a single Raptor. No radar return. No detection. Only destruction. General Thornton leaned forward, his voice measured. Colonel Bennett, your methods represent a fundamental shift in air combat. Dynamic signature management, as you describe it, isn't just innovation. It's revolution. But revolution carries risk. Explain to us why this should not be locked away as anomaly. Kayla held his gaze. She had been promoted since that night, lieutenant colonel now. But the rank felt hollow. It didn't change the silence she carried. Sir, she began, her voice steady, because anomaly is what the enemy expects us to dismiss. They assume we will cling to doctrine, to manuals, to safety. That's why they nearly broke us. The truth is, we lost air superiority the moment we believed our own invincibility. I didn't rewrite the rules. I only exposed what was already possible. Dr. Alexandra Stone, her old adversary turned reluctant ally, tapped her tablet. But Colonel, your methods required integrating systems beyond design. Flight controls, electronic warfare suites, engine management. If another pilot attempted this without your instinct, they could cause catastrophic failure. We can't ask pilots to gamble lives on improvisation. Kayla's reply was soft, and yet you asked them to gamble lives on doctrine that already failed. The room shifted uneasily. No one wanted to admit it, but she was right. 11 Raptors lost before her night. 11 pilots gone because they had trusted the system. General Thornton spoke again. If this program moves forward, it must become teachable, replicable. We need more than one ghost. Kayla exhaled. This was the part she dreaded, because what she had done couldn't be reduced to code or manuals. It had been part machine, part instinct, part something no simulator could ever recreate. Still, she nodded. Then you'll need to change how you train your pilots. Stop teaching them to memorize procedures. Teach them to understand, to feel, to adapt. A younger officer scoffed. You're asking fighter pilots to become scientists. Kayla's eyes flicked to him, sharp but calm. No, I'm asking them to become thinkers, to stop being predictable. The enemy isn't beaten by machines anymore. They're beaten by imagination. Silence followed, heavy, uncomfortable. That was how Ghost Protocol was born. It didn't look like other programs. There were no posters, no recruiting campaigns. It was quiet, buried under layers of clearance. Only volunteers entered, pilots willing to risk everything, willing to learn in ways that broke every rule they had memorized. Kayla stood in the middle of a barren hangar one evening as the first recruits filed in. Young, sharp-eyed, some eager, some skeptical. They looked at her not like a legend, but like a test. She didn't give them a speech about glory. She didn't promise victory. She only asked one question. Why do you want to be here? One pilot answered quickly, because I want to be untouchable. Kayla shook her head. Then you're in the wrong place. We're not here to be untouchable. We're here to learn how to bleed without breaking. They stared at her uncertain, but she could see it, the hunger, the part of them that knew doctrine wouldn't save them anymore. Training was brutal, not physically, though Kayla pushed them hard, but mentally. She dismantled everything they thought they knew. She forced them into simulations where their training failed, where every checklist ended in death. She demanded they improvise, adapt, think sideways. Some broke under the weight, others thrived. But all of them learned one truth: invisibility wasn't in the machine, it was in the pilot. Kayla watched them closely. Every mistake, every success. She wasn't looking for perfection. She was looking for instinct. The same instinct that had carried her through the night of 40 kills. Still, resistance came from outside. Traditional commanders called her reckless, dangerous. Safety boards filed reports warning of catastrophic risk. Whispered conversations doubted whether Ghost Protocol should exist at all. One evening, after a long day of training, General Patricia Reynolds, the Air Force Chief of Staff herself, walked into Kayla's office. The general's presence filled the room like gravity. "Colonel," Reynolds began, "your pilots achieve results that defy analysis, but they can't integrate with conventional squadrons. They don't follow predictable patterns. They disrupt coordination." Kayla didn't flinch. "Ma'am, that's because war isn't predictable anymore. Doctrine is what the enemy studies. Adaptation is what keeps us alive." Reynolds studied her, eyes sharp. "You're asking us to gamble the Air Force on people who break rules." Kayla's voice was quiet but unwavering. "No, ma'am. I'm asking you to gamble on people who think. If we don't, the enemy will gamble for us, and we will lose." The general was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Very well, but know this, you've created something we can't control, and one day that will terrify even us." When Reynolds left, Kayla sat alone in the quiet. The words echoed in her mind, "Something we can't control." She thought of the night in the sky, alone against 40. She thought of the faces she never saw again, the silence that wrapped around her after every kill. She had never wanted control. She had only wanted survival. But maybe survival was the thing they feared most, because it meant change. The Ghost Protocol squadrons grew. They weren't large, never more than a handful of pilots, but they were effective, too effective. Missions classified, victories whispered. The enemy adapted but never fast enough. Because Kayla's students didn't follow scripts, they wrote them as they flew. And yet Kayla felt the isolation deepen. For every success she was praised in words but sidelined in spirit. She knew the truth. They admired her results but they didn't trust her methods. She was still invisible, only now it was by choice. One night she walked the hangar alone, the jets sleeping in silence. She ran her hand along the wing of her Raptor, the one that had carried her through hell. Her reflection shimmered faintly on its skin. She whispered to the machine the way she always had. "We changed everything, and they'll never forgive us for it." Her voice broke just slightly, not from regret, from the weight of knowing she had given them victory and in return they had given her solitude. But solitude was the price, and she would pay it. Because some legacies are not meant to be celebrated. They are meant to be carried quietly by those willing to stay unseen. What remains when the ghost finally fades? 2 years after that night, the desert was quiet again. Edwards Air Force Base hummed with its usual rhythm, jets roaring, mechanics working, commanders briefing. But somewhere beneath the noise, a silence lingered. The kind that comes only from knowing something extraordinary had happened here, and that it could never be spoken aloud. Lieutenant Colonel Kayla Bennett walked the perimeter at dusk. Her shadow stretched long across the tarmac, fading into the orange light. She was older now, not by years, but by weight. The kind of weight that comes from carrying 40 lives, from rewriting doctrine, from standing alone against both enemy and institution. She stopped by Hangar 7, the same hangar where they had once dismissed her voice. Inside, young pilots moved with purpose. They were her students now, the inheritors of Ghost Protocol. Their movements were sharp, unpredictable. Their questions sharper still. They no longer repeated doctrine like scripture. They tested it, broke it, rebuilt it. Kayla watched from the doorway unseen. She didn't need to speak. The evidence of her legacy was there, in the way they flew, the way they thought, in their refusal to accept limits written by others. A voice stirred beside her. General Patricia Reynolds, calm and commanding, her uniform sharp against the dying light. "They've started calling them the Bennett Squadrons." Kayla's lips curved faintly, though her eyes held no pride. That wasn't the point. Reynolds studied her. "Maybe not, but names have a way of finding those who refuse them. You changed everything, Colonel. The enemy knows it. Our allies know it. The only ones still struggling to accept it are us." Kayla didn't reply. She only kept her eyes on the young pilots. Watching them reminded her of herself once, hungry, desperate to prove something. But unlike her, they weren't invisible. They had a place, a structure, even if it was secret. She had given them that at least. The general's voice softened. "Do you ever regret it, what it cost you?" Kayla's throat tightened. She thought of the silence in the briefing rooms, the laughter behind closed doors, the long nights she had walked alone on the flight line. She thought of the weight she had carried in the cockpit, the faces she never saw again, the moments where she herself had nearly vanished. She shook her head slowly. "Regret is for things you had a choice in. I didn't. The moment those fighters crossed the horizon, the choice was gone. It was act or let them burn." Reynolds nodded. "History will remember you, Colonel, whether you want it or not." Kayla's eyes drifted back to the runway. "History doesn't need to remember me. It needs to remember why we can't stop adapting." The general left her there, alone with her thoughts. That night Kayla returned to her quarters. She sat by the window staring out at the desert stars. She thought of her Raptor, the jet that had carried her beyond fear, beyond doctrine, beyond reason. They had stripped it down, tested it, catalogued every anomaly. But they had never found the ghost. Because the ghost wasn't in the metal. It had never been in the machine. It had always been in her refusal to disappear. Months later, Kayla received word she was being transferred. A quiet post away from the spotlight. It wasn't punishment, it was distance. She had become too large a shadow, too heavy a reminder. The institution couldn't carry her forever. She accepted without protest. Her last day at Edwards, the young pilots gathered as she passed. They didn't salute. They didn't need to. They simply looked at her with something far more powerful than ceremony, understanding. One of them, a young woman with sharp eyes and steady hands, stepped forward. "Ma'am," she said softly, "how do you know when you've done enough?" Kayla paused, the question piercing deeper than she expected. She thought of all she had endured, all she had lost, all she had carried. Her answer was quiet. "You don't. You just do what needs to be done. And if it leaves you unseen, then maybe that's the proof it mattered." The young pilot nodded, the weight of the words sinking into her bones. Kayla walked away, her boots echoing on the tarmac, her shadow stretching one last time across the base. She had both saved and unsettled. She knew her name would live in whispers. She knew Ghost Protocol would grow beyond her hands. She knew her legacy wasn't medals or titles. It was in the way others would fly when they refused to be trapped by doctrine. Years later, when the next war came, enemy commanders would whisper of phantoms again, of aircraft that didn't exist, of strikes that left no trace. And somewhere in those whispers, the shape of her story would linger. Not her name, not her face, just the truth she had lived, that invisibility was never about the radar. It was about refusing to let the world define your limits. And when her story was finally told, not in official records, but in the quiet voices of those who had flown under her shadow, it ended not with triumph, but with a truth so simple it felt like a prayer. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.